long strands of fatty acids that connect to a glycerol center, and this portion of the phospholipid is the same for many different structures of the phospholipid, and it is hydrophobic, which means that it doesn't like water. Then different things attached to this, such as which is found, this whole phospholipid is found on the outer leaflet layer of the cell membrane. There are three more that I'm going to show you. This is one found on the inner leaflet layer of the cell membrane. This one is also found in the inner leaflet layer of the cell membrane. This one
Trying to hold it up.
is also found on the inner leaflet layer of the cell membrane. Thank you. Okay. When phospholipids form at the surface of water, they form a monolayer, as shown. The monolayer is formed when the hydrophilic phosphate group stays in the water and the hydrophobic tails, the fatty acid tails that we showed you earlier, are above the surface. When there's a small group of phospholipids like this, they form a circle called a micelle, with the hydrophobic tails on the inside of the circle and the hydrophilic phosphate groups on the outside. When there are larger groups with more phospholipids, they form a lysosome, which has two rings of phospholipids. It has one with the hydrophobic tails facing out, like this, and one around that with the hydrophobic tails inward and the hydrophilic phosphate groups on the outside. This way it protects the tails from getting
play like that, Jack. That's
wet.
not okay.
And this inside circle here does have water in it.
As oxygen is nonpolar, when the cell needs some, it can pass through the cell membrane with no type of transport or carrier protein. It's also small, which helps. It goes from areas of high to low concentration. If there is a lot of it outside of the cell, it'll be easier for it to pass inside the cell. It can slip through the channels that exist when the cell needs it. Glucose is something else that the cell needs. For glucose to pass through the cell, it needs some form of carrier protein. This one is called GLUT carrier 1. As it passes through the cell, this shape allows it to pass through the cell.
Go away.
Glucose goes into the carrier protein, slides through, and then is released into the cell. As the cell uses glucose on a regular basis, it will continue to flow into the cell and does not need energy or a high to low concentration to do so. The third thing that the cell needs is water. Water enters cells through a type of carrier protein called aquaporin. A water molecule will only go into the cell if there is more water inside the cell, or if there's more water outside the cell than inside the cell. This is a high to low concentration. It flows through, and when the balance is sufficient, when there is the same number of water molecules inside the cell as outside, the reaction will stop until the cell needs more oxygen or water.
Okay. In order to move sodium and potassium in and out of the cell when it isn't balanced, you need to use active transport. And this process starts with a carrier protein called a sodium and potassium pump. And it starts open to the inside like this. then the sodium goes into their spots here, which is when ATP, or active transfer protein, here attaches to the bottom like this. Then the ATP breaks off and they're pushed to the outside of the cell. Now, once the carrier protein is open to the outside, two potassium go into their spots here, and they get pushed back inside. And then the process repeats.